Hello everyone, this is Dr. Krishnendu here with a new topic which is homeostasis. Homeostasis is something which is very important for exams as well as to understand the normal physiology of the human body. So it is a physiological process which keeps the internal environment of a living organism stable as well as balanced. It is this activity of cells throughout the body which maintains the physiological state within a now narrow range that is compatible with life. It is usually regulated by two mechanisms. One is negative feedback loops, and the other one, though less frequently, is positive feedback loops. The actual environment of the cells of the body is the interstitial component of the extracellular fluid. In multicellular organisms, immense number of regulatory mechanisms have evolved to maintain this equilibrium, and the term homeostasis was first termed by W.B. Cannon. The buffering properties of the body fluids and the renal and respiratory adjustments to the presence of excess acid or alkali are examples of different homeostasis mechanisms in our body. Many of these regulatory mechanisms they operate on the principle of negative feedback. Deviations from a normal set point are detected by a sensor. Signals from this sensor they trigger compensatory changes, and this continues until the set point is again reached and there is regaining of normalcy of the environment in the body. Here we have a diagram showing this set point. Here we see that when there is a deviation from the normal, the sensor is being stimulated. Then this sensor sends out information to the control center. And this control center, after processing this information, sends out command to the effector organ, which leads to correction, and the normally deviated thing regains back to normalcy. So, what is negative feedback? Negative feedback, we have a very common example to explain this. For example, we have normal levels of thyroxine. Here, what we see is there's no deviation from this normal level, and the normal level is continued. But when we see that there's an increased secretion of thyroxine, there's an inhibition of TSH secretion, which leads to decreased secretion of thyroxine, and again the normal level of thyroxine is achieved. The lower part of this diagram shows that when there's decreased secretion of thyroxine, there is stimulation of TSH secretion, and there's increased secretion of thyroxine, and we have normal levels of thyroxine achieved. Another example here is regarding the water content. When the water content in the body is normal, there is no deviation. But when it is decreased, there are two things which might happen. One is there's an increase in thirst and there's an increase in water intake, which leads back to normal water content. Or there might be stimulation of osmoreceptors in the hypothalamus, leading to increased ADS secretion from the posterior pituitary, leading to increased water retention by the kidneys, and normal water content is achieved. The opposite happens when there's increased water content. Either there's no thirst, leading to decrease in water content and normalcy is achieved, or there is no stimulation of osmoreceptors in the hypothalamus, as a result of which decreased ADH secretion from the posterior pituitary happens, leading to decreased water retention in the kidneys. And we again achieve normal water content. So this is a very common example of negative feedback mechanisms. Coming to positive feedback mechanisms, we have two examples here. One is blood coagulation, and the other one is uterine contraction during pregnancy. Here, what we see is when there's an injury to the blood vessel and there's bleeding, there's formation of prothrombin activator, which leads to conversion of prothrombin into thrombin. And this thrombin again further leads to activation of this prothrombin activator, and it is gradually increased until the conversion of fibrinogen into fibrin happens and there is stoppage of bleeding. So this is an example of positive feedback. Means what? Means more amount is secreted by smaller amounts of that substance. Another example here we see is during onset of labor, there is contraction of uterus. There is movement of fetus into the cervix. There is dilatation of cervix. There is movement of fetus to the cervix, and there is stimulation of receptors in the cervix. This leads to discharge of impulses from these receptors and transmission of impulses to hypothalamus, leading to oxytocin from the hypothalamus, which again by positive feedback leads to contraction of uterus. So this is a example of positive feedback. That means a small amount of contraction of uterus leads to further contraction of uterus, as a result of which labor is achieved. There are several types of homeostatic regulations in our body. Examples of these are thermoregulation. Here, what happens? The body temperature is maintained at a stable level at around 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit by certain mechanisms. Next example is osmoregulation. Here, the body strives to maintain the right amount of water and electrolytes inside and outside the cells in our body. And we also have an example of chemical regulation. Here, the body regulates other chemical mechanisms as well as to keep the systems in balance. The most common example is here pH regulation in the body. Thank you for patient hearing.